The US bombs key Iranian nuclear sites, updates and analysis from former IDF international spokesperson Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus, and then we'll hear from journalist, physician and activist Dr. Qanta Ahmed. Keeping you up to date, I'm Michael Dickson, and from StandWithUs TV, this is Special Briefing. Shalom from Israel. We're coming to you remotely outside of our studio once again to ensure the safety of our team. As the US hits 3 of Iran's nuclear facilities, we'll break down what happened and what happens next with 2 top-tier guests in just a moment. But first, here's a truth that history won't forget. Iran and Israel were once friendly nations. Before the 1979 Islamic Revolution, we had diplomatic relations, economic ties, and cultural exchanges. Iran supplied Israel with energy and cooperated on defense. Israeli doctors trained Iranian medical staff, and Israeli engineers helped develop Iranian agriculture. There was a shared understanding between 2 ancient peoples navigating a modern world. In 1979, religious extremists took over Iran, and everything changed. The partnership with Israel was shattered, replaced by venomous hatred. Iran's regime began funding and arming genocidal terrorist groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis, encircling Israel with threats. Iranian leaders called for death to America, to the UK, and to Israel, and to all those who opposed their rule. They built a nuclear weapons program and tried to hide it from the world, while developing missiles that can carry atomic bombs. Some dismiss these realities and claim that the current war is a repeat of past failures in Iraq. Well, take it from David Albright, head of the Institute for Science and International Security. Albright is a former nuclear inspector with the International Atomic Energy Agency. In 2003, he was among the first to criticize the Bush administration's claims about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Now listen to what he has to say about Iran today.
And so there's very concrete evidence that while there was nothing to be found with Iraq in 2002, 2003, there was a lot to be found in Iran. That here you have a pretty large nuclear program, portions of which are secret and dedicated to being able to make nuclear weapons.
We do not celebrate this war or the suffering it has brought to civilians in Israel and Iran. Nor do we take for granted the serious risks taken by the US in its courageous decision to join Israel in striking Iran's nuclear sites. May the war between Israel and Iran soon come to an end. May the Iranian people liberate themselves from their regime. May the money wasted on terrorism, uranium, and missiles be invested in a thriving Iran. And may the chance of death to Israel soon be replaced by a reality of life, freedom, and peace for all of us. Joining me now from Israel, as ever, is former IDF international spokesperson, Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus. Jonathan, great to have you back with us. Multiple bunker-busting bombs, 30 Tomahawk missiles targeting 3 critical sites, Natanz, Isfahan, and Fordo. What do we know about this dramatic strike?
Well, we know that we'll have to wait for a few hours until we get final battle damage assessment of exactly how effective those strikes were. Obviously, 2 locations are easier, but Fordo is more challenging to understand exactly how effective these unprecedented American strikes were. I think in terms of radiation, the Atomic Agency and the Iranians have already said that there's no risk of radiation. So that's a good thing because the enriched radioactive material was moved out of these locations beforehand. And what this really means now is that I think the ball is back in the Iranian court, and now they will have to make a decision how to proceed from here. I think the chances and the stakes are now higher for the Iranian regime. Now it's not only about their nuclear weapons program, but this could go way beyond that scope. And it all depends on how the Iranians will respond to Israeli actions, and of course, the very important American actions. If they choose to escalate, they are extremely vulnerable, and I think it would be a grave mistake that they will regret in the future. And if they choose not to escalate, then maybe they could come to an agreement through diplomatic channels and get away with still existing without the rest of Iran coming under direct Israeli or joint Israeli and US attacks.
And Iran invested $500 billion over 40 years in its nuclear program, while the country's in poverty, hyper high inflation, currency collapse, widespread poverty. It's prioritized nukes over its people, hasn't it? And now that's all in ruins.
Not only that, Iran has also spent billions and billions, if not trillions, on funding terror organizations around the Middle East. And that project is now also past its most glorious days, should we say conservatively. And yes, the Iranian people has been robbed by the Iranian regime, and their present and their future has really been affected by it. Now, what the Iranian regime has done is to bet that by achieving nuclear weapons, they would be able to safeguard themselves from any external threat and any external influence on it. That bet has now failed. That bluff has been called, and those actions have been seen through by Israel and by the US. And now the Iranians will have to make a really difficult choice. A choice that basically is between their honor or their respect or the future of the regime. If they're clever enough and they're cool-headed enough, the smart thing to do is to de-escalate and to agree to no future attempts of enrichment in Iran and to let go of the pipe dream of ever having nuclear weapons. If they're smart, that's what they will do. And I think they'll find a very positive partner in President Trump. He would want to do that deal, and the Iranians would be able to get away with the regime intact. If they're not smart, if they let their emotions lead the way, and if they will get bundled up with this is our credibility and we've spent so much money and time and resources and this is national pride, then this could get much, much worse for them because, again, worth to mention, Iran is exposed. Iran has no air defenses, and all of their critical national infrastructure is there for the taking if Israel or the US should decide to do so for whatever reason. And I think the Iranians have to be extremely careful, calm and cool-headed, and understand their priorities and understand in what a sensitive military situation they're in. They're not in the driving seat. They are not in a position to be dictating terms to anybody, not to Israel and not to the US and not even to the Europeans. And any mistakes that they'll do could be very, very difficult for the future of that regime.
And those mistakes could look like a lot of different things, couldn't they? We've already seen ballistic missiles fired towards Israel. Some penetrated, some landed with devastation that those cause. So what comes next? Should they choose the wrong path? And what could potentially be options that they may take?
Well, obviously, Iran still has military capabilities. They could try to lash out at American assets in the region, in the Middle East. There's lots of American bases and naval assets deployed. They could try to do that. They could try to hit American targets elsewhere, which would be more difficult. They could, of course, try to use proxies, terrorist organizations or thugs, organized crime, to hit Israeli, Jewish, or American targets in Europe or in Asia. We know that this is a modus operandi that the Iranians have tried to use many times. Just yesterday, a man that is a member of the Revolutionary Guard was apprehended in Cyprus. He was planning an attack on Israeli targets, but through advanced intel and cooperation between different security services, he was apprehended. And we know that they have plans to do that in other areas, specifically in Europe and Asia. So the worst mistake that I think the Iranians could do now would be to attack American troops or to try to limit the flow of oil and maritime traffic through the Straits of Hormuz. that would be really challenging. I think it would open up a Pandora's box of attacks on Iran, which I'm not entirely sure that they comprehend.
Let's remind our viewers why these strikes, both by Israel and the United States, are happening now at this time, because naysayers in the West, as I mentioned in my monologue, are charged that this is like Iraq. They say there was no real threat. But this isn't Iraq, is it?
No, I mean, that's, I think, a very faulty and quite lazy comparison. This is very different. This is Israel dealing with an existential threat. And like the German chancellor said, Israel doing the dirty work for the world. And if we listen to the statements made by France, by the EU, by the UK, by Germany, and by the US, there's quite rare, unprecedented support of Israel. The first paragraph of each and every of those statements clearly says Iran must not be able to achieve nuclear weapons. And what Israel has done is to take preemptive action against Iran and preventing Iran from achieving that. And of course, now the US has delivered the final and decisive blow. That is the context of what's happening. This is not wanton Israeli aggression. This is not American imperialism. This is nothing of the kind. This is a rogue, unstable, fundamental, and extremist regime, the Iranian regime, that has been trying desperately and really harnessing many of the talents and most of the resources of their country in a quest to achieve nuclear weapons, weapons of mass destruction. And frankly, I think we've been through about 20 years of international negotiations, maybe even more than that. And the issue of Iranian nuclear weapons has been really debated and negotiated diplomatically for very, very long, almost 25 years. Iran has had so many off-ramps, so many warnings, so many opportunities to de-escalate and to make the right choice. I think they had very flexible and liberal partners in the previous American administrations that really gave them extremely lenient and in my mind, dangerous deals that could have allowed them to have a peaceful, benign nuclear program. But that isn't what Iran wanted. Iran wanted to be able to develop weapons, and they were sprinting, rushing in order to develop these weapons. That's why Israel struck. Israel also struck because President Trump gave the Iranians 60 days to negotiate. They failed to reach an agreement. They failed to accept any American offers. And on the 61st day, on the 13th of June, Israel commenced attacks against Iran's nuclear weapons program. So, of course, naysayers, maybe they will be listening to the statements of the Iranian foreign minister and all of the other lies that are coming out of Iran. It doesn't change reality. The Iranian regime is a dangerous, unstable, fundamentalist regime that shouldn't exist to begin with, and it definitely shouldn't have its hands on weapons of mass destruction. And now Israel has taken the first step. The US has taken a second and probably crucial step. And if the Iranians are smart, they leave it at that. If they're not smart, they escalate, and then we can find ourselves in a whole different and much more dangerous dynamic in the region.
Now, the Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, responded to the strikes immediately, saying he is, quote, gravely concerned about the use of force by the United States against Iran. That seems like a strange way to say thank you, America, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost echoing in a few less words the statement of the Iranian foreign minister. So it seems that those two are well coordinated. They are reading from the same message page. And I think that is, of course, extremely, extremely sad. One of the responses that I read on X to his statement was that, you know, if this was World War II, judging by that response, there wouldn't have been a doubt who he would have sided with in World War II. And it's not with the good guys. I think it's another example of how morally corrupt and dysfunctional the UN has become. It's being exposed time and time again. I say that with great regret and frustration, because I think that's an organization that is desperately needed in a world where there is lots of food insecurity, climate challenges, many and wars and instability, and of course non-democratic regimes that are oppressing people. But it doesn't seem as if the UN is focused on doing that, and it seems as if it's working for autocrats, working for tyrants of the world, whether it's China or Russia or in this case Iran. Very regrettable, sadly not a surprise to read that kind of statement. And if anything, it proves just how far from its charter and its core mission the UN has allowed itself to slip.
I should say there is much support from other quarters. Indeed, Elisha Wiesel, the son of Holocaust survivor, Nobel Prize winner, and human rights activist Elie Wiesel, posted a thank you to the president for honoring his promise to protect the Jewish people from the enemies who sought to annihilate us. It's been a week, just over a week, since Israel began the campaign and since we last spoke, the day after the president's deadline for negotiations ran out, as you mentioned. Take us through some of the military successes so far.
Yeah, so if I detach myself, from my own eyes as someone who looks at things from an Israeli perspective, if I just look at Iran and Israel and take stock of the military situation, I would say that militarily speaking, it is a situation where Israel enjoys almost all of the advantages. Israel, through really prime intel and Air Force capabilities, has been able to achieve the following things. One, to take out the vast majority of the Iranian military leadership in the opening salvo of the war, but then to continue to hunt the successors and the successors of the successors in some positions like head of intel for the Revolutionary Guard. It is now the third general that has been eliminated, and in a few other positions as well. That's one important thing. Two, nuclear scientists. This is perhaps the most important part because, and I actually agree with the Iranians here, knowledge is a difficult thing to bomb. But you can do is you can take out the repository of such knowledge in the form of nuclear scientists and weapons scientists and advanced metals scientists. And they were taken out. 10 of them have been taken out by Israel in the opening salvo. And that sets the Iranian weapons program back many, many years. That is something, those 10 scientists together, decades or even more than that, centuries of knowledge, experience, and know-how that the Iranian regime now no longer has. So that's very important. Third achievement is in terms of the nuclear facilities. I don't think that there's a single component left now after the American strikes. I do not believe that there's a single component left of the Iranian nuclear program that has been left unattacked. Not everything has been destroyed yet, and there is still work to do. But I would say that the vast majority of targets have been struck, and now it's a question of battle damage assessment, and if necessary, to strike again and again in order to really set back the Iranian weapons program. 4 is Israel's ability to take out Iranian air defenses. And what that has done, and again, this is very much contrary to conventional wisdom and the assessments of many Israel critics before that. They said Israel wouldn't be able to strike in Iran and that the mighty air defenses of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard would shoot down our F-35s and our F-15s flying in Iranian skies. That, thankfully, has not happened. And today, Israel has total freedom of movement and aerial superiority in Iranian skies. No small achievement, and that is very important when we look ahead as to where things are going and where this conflict is leading. And last but not least, Israel is successfully hunting and taking out Iran's missile launchers. More than 55%, according to the IDF, more than 55% of Iran's of their ballistic missile launches have been taken out. And every time a missile is fired, the location is marked on a map, and the IDF starts hunting the launcher, and of course does so preemptively before they try to fire as well. That, by the way, is very important because that appears to be the only way that Iran can leverage influence and attack Israel currently. Everything else hasn't been working, not their proxies, not ground forces, not global terrorism, but ballistic missiles. And by the way, the drones have not been working either. Israel has been able to intercept 99% of all incoming drones, and we're talking about a big number. More than 1,000 drones have been dispatched from Iran towards Israel. Most of them have been intercepted out of Israeli airspace through cooperation with the US and other countries. And though there were a few that penetrated Israeli airspace, they were blown out of the sky. One impacted yesterday in the northern city of Beit She'an, luckily not leading to any casualties, but substantial damage to a building. So all in all, I would say that the Iranians are left with less and less military options on the table, which is a very refreshing and different position for them to be in. And Israel has complete freedom of movement and lots of tools at their disposal. And now it's really only about decisions. Will the Iranians escalate? If they do, Israel has a very large target bank of national infrastructure, of oil and gas infrastructure and regime locations and many other things that Israel could strike if the Iranians decide to continue and escalate this situation.
Let's turn to Gaza for a moment. Our mutual friend and our guest on last week's show, Colonel Richard Kemp, visited Gaza this week and saw for himself how well the new Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is operating. Take a look.
Richard Kemp at one of the GHF food distribution centres inside Gaza. As you can see behind me, there are a large number, around about 20,000 Gazans have come here to collect aid delivered into Gaza by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. And there's about 20 trucks worth of food behind me. Most of the people are very happy, I think, to be getting this aid compared to what existed before the GHF started operations, which in many cases was very little or none. So I think the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, to me, seems to do an extraordinary job here in Gaza. And I hope that some of the international aid and humanitarian organisations that have rejected the GHF's work will rethink this. This is a really important mission that the GHF is carrying out in the interest of the welfare and feeding of the people of Gaza.
So they're giving out more than 33.5 million meals in 3 weeks. That's good news for Gaza, but bad news for Hamas, isn't it?
Yes, it's great for hungry Gazans that have been oppressed by Hamas, but it's not good for Hamas, and all of their friends around the world are not happy. We see condemnations left and right and center from all kinds of organizations, some that claim to be humanitarian organizations, and then outright supporters of Hamas and Hamas's allies. I think it is perhaps really the peak of cynicism. Anybody who alleges that he or she cares about the plight of the situation of Palestinians, he and she should of course be very supportive of this endeavor that Israel is now finally doing, facilitating food to Palestinians without Hamas being able to intercept it and control it. And it really just is this very clear litmus test with who really cares about Palestinians and who is in it for other reasons. And those who are currently criticizing the Israeli efforts, those who are trying to delegitimize it, those who are trying to make it to fail, are the same people that are probably not guided by the best interest and well-being of Palestinians, but by other things, by Hamas staying in power, by continuing difficulties for Israel, perhaps future Palestinian statehood, or any other issue, any other nefarious goal that can be leveraged. And I think it's very telling. But the bottom line and the reality on the ground is irrefutable. What Israel is doing, together with the Gaza Humanitarian Fund and its other partners, is a system that works. It provides food to Palestinians, and it doesn't allow Hamas to meddle with it and to use food as leverage and basically to extort the Palestinian population by using international humanitarian aid. My assessment is that this will continue, and that Israel will continue to undermine and loosen Hamas's grip on the population, and that eventually the population in Gaza will be strong enough and brave enough to really resist Hamas. That, together with military pressure, continuous, relentless Israeli military pressure on Hamas, and now the fact that their Iranian masters have found themselves in quite a military and diplomatic predicament, maybe that will be enough to finally get Hamas leadership to understand the futility of what they're doing and get them to surrender, hand over hostages, and start the much needed work of thinking about the day after in Gaza and starting to rebuild it to the benefit of civilians living there, not for the Hamas terrorists that have been controlling it and that have brought destruction on Gaza.
And we should mention that the IDF today rescued the bodies of 3 hostages, Ofra Kedar, Jonathan Samarano, and Shai Levinson. That's 625 days after being taken into captivity on October the 7th. That's an important and a complex operation, isn't it?
Yeah, it goes to show that the Israeli defense establishment, ISA, Shabak, IDF, and everybody else, Intel, they continue tirelessly to look for clues, to generate intel, and then once enough intel is collected, to send Israeli special forces to those locations where we believe that bodies of hostages are held, in order to extract them and to bring them home to the families and at least offer a small amount of solace and closure for the families so that they can at least bury their loved ones. The 3 of these Israeli civilians, one was a soldier, but he wasn't in military service when, sorry, I'll strike that. These 3 Israelis, one of them soldier, a tank commander, and a 71-year-old woman who was murdered out on her morning walk. Again, they were murdered on the 7th of October and their bodies were taken by Hamas. And the only reason Hamas held on to the bodies was in order to extract a price from Israel. So extremely cruel, extremely tormenting for the families. But I think it's positive that at least they're being brought back home. And it goes to show that the hostages are not forgotten, the families are not forgotten, the fallen are not forgotten. And Israel continues without respite and without stopping in its quest to return all of the Israeli hostages back. Hopefully, we'll be able to get the live ones back. They are, of course, the most important one and the most urgent one. And I think, if global powers like France, the UK, and Germany can show sense and they can support Israel against one menace, the Iranian regime, I think they should show the same kind of moral compass and adjust course and support Israel in what it's doing against Hamas. Hamas and the Iranian regime are part of the same axis. They're part of the same effort to destroy the state of Israel. One nation was seeking nuclear and weapons of mass destruction, and one terrorist organization only had the ability to abduct and to kill Israelis living close to Gaza. But they are part of the same mindset and they should be fought with the same tenacity. And I think the free world should stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel and support Israel in its fight against Hamas.
Absolutely. 50 hostages still in Gaza, 20 presumed to be alive. In a moment, I'll give our next guest, Dr. Ahmed, a chance to tell us her view on what a new Middle East could look like. But in your view, should the regime fall, and now that the nuclear ambitions of the regime are being dealt such a blow, what might the future hold?
Well, I'm thrilled that you're bringing on Dr. Qanta Ahmed, a renowned Middle East expert. She's all over international media, and I'm sure will share very interesting things about her perspective, her unique perspective as a Muslim woman who's been following events in this area for a long time. I would say, I'm cautiously optimistic that the right-sizing or downsizing of the Iranian regime in terms of its nuclear ambitions, in terms of its capacity to continue to fund terrorism that destabilizes the region, and the fact that most of its proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Islamic Jihad, have been weakened, Those are, of course, good things for the region. They're good for Israel. They're good for Lebanon, for Gaza, for Palestinians, and for Jordan. However, there is a chance that things will escalate further, and perhaps we will see regime change in Iran. Now here, of course, I would like to see the Iranian regime be relegated to the dustbin of history. Why? Because it is an evil, oppressive, violence-loving death cult that is motivated by the most extreme ideology. And I think they have no place, not in the Middle East, and not continuing to oppress the Iranian people. And I'm sure that millions of Iranians would be extremely happy if that regime were to be overthrown and they would be able to chart their own future. However, I'm a little bit cautious here, because we don't know how that will pan out. And we know that revolutions many times are messy. And my basic principle is that I think this is something that is up to the Iranian people and only the Iranian people. I think we've seen a lot of failed nation building and regime changes in the past in the Middle East. And I think Iran, the Iranian people, is a very large, smart, educated, and it has a very long and illustrious history. And the important thing here is that the Iranians will be able to organize and chart their own way towards a better and more prosperous future. What I think we have to be mindful of is that it's not going to be an easy first transition process and period. It might get bumpy, it might get bloody, but at the end of it, I hope that the Iranian people will have a better future. And if that happens, of course, the region will be more stable and Israel will be better off. And I think there will be lots of positive opportunities for the region, for the Iranian people, for Sunni Arabs in the region, and of course for Israel. The Iranian regime is extremely evil. It does not have the needs of the Iranian people as its first priority, first or second priority. It's oppressive, it's brutal, it's horrible against minorities, and it has no right to continue to exist and oppress with their aggressive goals. And I hope that we'll see change in the future. I'll, curb my enthusiasm and optimism. I think there's still some way to go because we're talking about a very brutal regime. But at the end of the day, good things, I think, will come. And I hope that we will see peace through strength that has been displayed by Israel and by the US. And I hope that will give strength to the Iranian people, strength to peace-loving and progress-loving people in the region. And hopefully we'll see good things.
We certainly hope so. Well, Jonathan, as a certain tweet stated, thank you for your attention to this matter. We appreciate your insight as always, my friend. Stay safe. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael. Shalom.
Don't forget, if you want to stay updated, the Stand With Us WhatsApp channel gives you round-the-clock updates. Go to the updates section on WhatsApp and search for Stand With Us, or click on the link on the homepage at StandWithUs.com. And if you like the show and you like our work, you can support it there too. StandWithUs.com/donate. Now, our next guest is a physician, a journalist, and activist. Her work has been published in The Guardian, The Wall Street Journal, Al Jazeera, Fox News, CNN, and more. She's the first physician and first Muslim woman to be awarded the Templeton-Cambridge Fellowship in Journalism at the University of Cambridge. In 2012, she testified to Congress on radical Islam in the United States. Coming to us from Israel, and at this historic time, we're thrilled to have with us Dr. Qanta Ahmed. Dr. Ahmed, thank you for joining us. Great to have you with us. You've been in Israel throughout this Iran-Israel war. What's it been like for you?
It's been an extraordinary experience. First of all, I've been to this war 4 times, but this is the first time that we've seen ballistic missile impact. Obviously, it brings it home in terms of the Iranian threat. I was able to see locations of the impact of Iranian ballistic missiles that were hitting civilian areas here. I went to the first scene of the impact in Ramat Gan and filmed and reported from there. I was able to visit a couple of major hospitals to look at how The country is responding to the hundreds that are injured and the dozens that are seriously injured. Unfortunately, some of them have lost their lives. And to look at the resilience of the civilian population has been extraordinary. While I've been in touch with many of my military contacts, though I was not able to meet with them, they're on high alert.
And those ballistic missiles cause terrible, devastating effects, don't they?
Extraordinary damage. The scenes at Ramat Gan, those are the scenes that I went to see immediately in the aftermath. It's extraordinary what one ballistic missile can achieve. And those have a payload we think of on average about 2 tons. Entire buildings, multi-story buildings leveled, covered in dust, very like ground zero. Initially, when I looked at the vehicles, they're upended, they're very decimated, all of the broken glass, some of the cars are upside down. I thought they'd been incinerated, but that is purely the impact from the aftershocks, which are tremendous. And then visiting the surrounding buildings, you can see the horrific impact of shrapnel on heavyweight cladding of neighboring buildings. And so you can imagine what that does to a person. I was also able to pick out scenes of children's toys, strollers, obviously the curtains of a nursery. These were families. All of the targeting has been of civilians, and most shocking, the targeting of the Soroka hospital in the Negev.
Yeah, and I know that the day before that terrible attack on Soroka Hospital in Beersheba, you had toured Rambam's hospital's underground facility. Pretty amazing that a hospital needs an underground facility. Tell us more about that, please.
That's right. That's the Sami Ofer underground fortified hospital. In fact, that was built in the aftermath of the Israel-Hezbollah war that happened in 2006. And to me, I saw that as that hospital was opened approximately 2014, I think, if I'm correct. And I was you have such mixed feelings that a country has to build a fortified hospital that is missile proof, that can withstand conventional warfare, unconventional warfare, including nuclear warfare. The fact that that was required and the country and the philanthropists invested in that knew that atrocious conflict was coming. This week, I was able to see the entire population of the Rambam Healthcare Center, 1,000 patients relocated underground, 3 stories below the Mediterranean seabed, receiving all the care. 300 children that were children of employees working there in daycare and getting an education, and actually in very high spirits. Cancer patients getting chemotherapy, surgeries going on. 6 babies were being delivered while I was there. All of that in the underground area. Each level is 5 acres. It has a 15-acre footprint underground. And while that is an extraordinary feat of medicine and engineering and resilience, it gives you a sense of the conditions that Israel has had to function under for decades because of the Islamic Republic and its policy of annihilation towards the state of Israel.
Take a measure of this moment for us, if you will. How do you see the Israeli strikes on the Iranian regime impacting the Middle East as a whole? And what are your hopes for the region?
So I think there's no doubt after the devastation of October 7th, Israel has regrouped in many ways militarily, and I believe is the supreme fighting force on the planet. It's a very small nation. People should know it's about the size of New Jersey. It has completely capitulated Iran in terms of air dominance within a few days. Actually, within a weekend, Israel had absolute control of the airspaces of Western Iran to Tehran, and now the entire republic. That is how powerful the Israeli military and strategists are. So this has stunned the world. This is possible because Israel has fought an atrocious defensive war for its survival on multiple fronts against Hamas. That war is still ongoing. against Hezbollah, which has been completely decimated and is in tatters. And on Monday of this week, that's probably day 2 going into day 3 of the Israeli preemptive strikes, stated it would not be entering this conflict. That tells you how much degradation Hezbollah has withstood. And because of Israel's defensive war, that has precipitated the liberation of Syria from Assad. So we are at a moment where I do believe the Iranian Islamist Republic has crumbled. They are evacuating their relatives to Russia. That's been seen in a number of reports. They're going in private planes. Recently, there were some aerial routes observed from Tehran to Oman, even though the airspace is closed. Speculation is that is the relatives of regime officials that are being moved out. We know multiple levels of IRGC commanders have been targeted and eliminated by Israel. The threat to Israel is an existential one, and not only because of the nuclear capabilities. These ballistic missiles, the one that fell there in Soroka Hospital, they are bigger and faster, they're hypersonic, they are targeting civilian populations, and because of its intention, the Islamist Republic could lay waste to the entire state of Israel if it is not defanged. So the existential threat is coming from the ballistic missile operations and from the nuclear threat. And what many Americans don't realize is that threat is, it has been expanded across the region because of Iran's policies of waging war through other nations. It used Syria as a proxy. It has captured Lebanon until recently. It has activated missile factories that Saddam Hussein had, manned them with IRGC guards and Iranian engineers, and trained those missile batteries on American interests, including Tel Aviv and Riyadh. That has been the policy, not to forget at the south, of also arming and supplying the Houthis and getting them to train on Israel. This is all the work of the Islamist Iranian Republic. It has also wrought terror on 5 continents over the last 5 decades. Let's not forget the murders of hundreds of Jewish people in South America by Iranian terrorists. Let's not forget the attempted murder of the Saudi Arabian ambassador in the United States. Fortunately, that was foiled. We lost hundreds of soldiers in military barracks in Lebanon in 1982. There were so many terror attacks. And even now, our current officials up to the level of President Trump have been targeted. This is a deadly regime, and we're at a moment where it can be defanged forever. My belief is this operation that Israel has launched is entirely to guarantee the survival of the Jewish state. It actually benefits the wider region. Let's say this comes through. We then have a chance not only for the Iranian people to define their own future, and they have been in anguish for decades under the rule of the tyrannical clerics and the legion of Islamist theocrats. It would give them a chance at defining their own future without theocracy. It would actually liberate Iraq, which is heavily sabotaged and subjugated by Iran. It would cement the future of Syria, which has already allowed Israel to operate out of its airspace and is already making very strong alliances with Saudi Arabia, which is heavily pro-Western and anti-radicalization. And it would finally take the remaining wind out of the sails of Hamas, which knows it's in its death throes. And I think it would lead to the crumbling of Hamas and finally the return of these hostages. The entire region will be transformed for the foreseeable, I think, century.
Amazing. Let us hope that transpires. You wrote an article titled Adventures of an Accidental Zionist. How did you become an accidental Zionist?
Oh, that's a very long time ago, that article. But I would say I said recently to a close friend that I was very glad I was on the right side of this conflict, By that, I mean, I see so many Americans, even very prominent Americans, have taken an extraordinary, intense anti-Israel position, and I think anti-Semitic position. They've demonized the concept of Zionism. My understanding of Zionism is Zionism allows for self-determination of the Jew. And I see that all other peoples in the world are allowed to have self-determination. Self-determination of the Jew after the Holocaust, the largest crime against humanity, which almost extinguished the Jewish people. That wasn't the reason Israel was formed, but it certainly is what is in the memory of Jewish people. So I believe the Jewish people have a right to land. I believe they have a right to nationhood, and I believe they have a right to existence. Those are rights that all of us enjoy in the Muslim majority world across huge swathes of land. I also believe that Zionism, the right to Jewish self-determination, does not come at the expense of the right for an existence of Palestinians. So I believe that there is a two-state solution, and I do not believe Zionism is excluding that or nihilistic about that. That's my understanding.
And so
Why it was accidental
yes,
is really because on September 11th, I was treating patients in Saudi Arabia, and that's from where I saw the events of 9/11. And that's where I learned that there was extremism amongst people of my religion, which I found anathema. And I then went on an odyssey to understand radical Islam and have looked at its impacts, learned about Israel being the prime target of radical Islam, no matter which group you examine, but visited the aftermath of radical Islam, whether it's in Pakistan after the Taliban had waged terrible occupation on Pakistani territory, met with child soldiers that had been radicalized and operative within the Taliban. I've met with the Yazidi people that survived the ISIS genocide, the Kurdish Peshmerga that defeated ISIS. I've met with the aftermath of all of that to understand the ideology. And in the middle of that ideology is nihilistic and unremitting Jew hatred. And as a physician, it is my privilege, and it is a tragedy, that I am still attending patients that survived 9/11 as first responders. So I understand the impact of Islamist terrorism on a generational basis, not only on the bodies and minds of my patients, but the impact on their families. I picked the side which was against radical Islam 25 years ago, and I'll remain on that side, including when Israel is the recipient of that kind of terrorism.
absolutely. And you've done such incredible work. I wonder what your reaction then is, or maybe your message to those who you see on the West in the streets of, New York, Los Angeles, London, waving the Hezbollah flag, or feeling that they are reflexively anti-Israel. What, from your perspective, what would you tell those people?
It's extremely disturbing, and I'm not sure that I would address those people. They are absolutely indoctrinated. They are as radicalized as any element that might be performing violent jihad. All of the violent jihad terrorism, or the evolutionary jihadism, as scholars call it, is based on an underpinning of nonviolent ideology. And I think Americans are naive. I think Americans are extraordinarily disengaged. They don't understand that these protest movements that have intensified since October 7th, these are cultivated operations. They're based on merging propaganda in the digital space, the concept of protesting as a culture, America's very liberal democracy that allows freedom of assembly, freedom of expression, freedom of speech, that has been absolutely weaponized to promote the exact same ideology that I have seen radicalizing operatives that ultimately worked for ISIS or worked for the Taliban. So the US has a very big problem. We have generations of radicalized individuals, and we've been tolerating the expression of that radicalization. My Muslim friends, whether they are Peshmerga commanders or whether they are living in the Gulf Arab region, are absolutely shocked that this is permitted. I even going further back, I've met with Islamic scholars in East Africa, in Rwanda, another country that survived genocide. And they asked me about the extremism in the remarks of Ilhan Omar, the congresswoman from Minnesota, who is a disgrace to the United States. I see that she is stating today that no Americans have been killed or harmed by the Islamic Republic. Her sound bites are pro-Islamist propaganda. I don't know if she's an Islamist, but she seems to side on their side constantly from the halls of Congress. So we have a very big problem that we have armies of radicalized youth who are absolutely impervious to fact or truth, and they are ready to raise the flags of these terror groups. And that is going to cause severe risk and harm to the fabric of the United States.
Finally, you mentioned resilience, and you've been in Israel during this incredibly turbulent time. There'll be many watching in our Stand With Us audience who love and cherish Israel and have a real sense of concern and anxiety. What's your message to them based on your experience of being here?
So I would say take heart and follow the example of the Israeli people who nobody here is in outright panic. People are absolutely pragmatic. People, the cooperation between, let's say, all of the staff in a hospital, the cooperation between neighbors, the cooperation between people that are taking me from one place to the other. Often I'm doing media. The team response, the team spirit is extraordinary. Plus, sadly, in the last 2 years, the Israeli people have been absolutely battle hardened because of the agonies following October 7th. I think they see that there is an end to this. And while President Trump is conveying, I believe, a message simultaneously that is resolute and ambivalent, it's very puzzling, President Trump's messages from the White House. I'm absolutely confident the Israelis have planned and gone through war gaming and game theory to anticipate how they would go forward without the United States engagement at this critical stage. So I feel optimistic. I feel also, through all of the channels that I speak with, individuals that are in other countries, connected to other governments, connected to NATO, receiving information from the Pentagon, all of the off-the-record conversations indicate that there is tremendous support for dismantling the Islamist regime. This is not a war against the Iranian people, and there has also been tremendous cooperation by Israel's treaty partners. The traditional partners, Egypt and Jordan, have been absolutely in sync with the Israeli Defense Forces. They do so discreetly, but there is no, let's say, no gap between their priorities. And also the new partners, the Abraham Accords partners. People may not know that the Emirates Airlines has flown here every day of the war until now, when Israel for Safety has closed the airspace here. There has been tremendous stress put on the Abraham Accords nations, and they have risen to the challenge. So Israel is not alone. Israel is ideologically absolutely correct in terms of wanting to safeguard its existence. It is a sovereign state. It is participant and a member of the international order. And Israel's survivalship does not mean there will be no future for the Palestinians. Quite the opposite. Because Israel will survive and defend its borders means there can be a possibility for the Palestinian people after Hamas, a demilitarized Palestine, a Palestine with respect and dignity that can live alongside Israel in peace. I do believe that's coming. And I think the last thing that will happen, and I would say to President Trump, this decision to denuclearize Iran could be remarkable, I believe, and his crown jewel, and rightly so, is the Abraham Accords. I believe we're going to see expansion of the Abraham Accords. I think my guess is Syria will likely join first, quickly followed by Lebanon. Now Israel is in peace with all of its neighbors. I think thereafter, Iraq has already expressed significant sentiment for normalization. amongst some of its leading Sunni tribesmen. The Kurdish region has been pro-Israel no matter what the cost. We have Azerbaijan that is also likely to join. We have seen the Field Marshal Asim Munir of Pakistan meet behind closed doors with the President of the United States, and Pakistan has committed to support the United States in whatever its endeavors. The way Pakistan will support is to provide intelligence, logistics, access to ports, launch areas for drones, and Pakistan is not going down the rabbit hole in a futile exercise to defend the tyrannical Republic of Iran. Pakistan knows the future is with the United States and the survivorship of Israel. I think that's what these actions are showing.
What a time. Well, Dr. Qanta Ahmed, we thank you for your solidarity, for your insight and your eloquence. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Michael. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Important analysis at a critical time. Thank you for your continued messages of support from right around the world. At this time of all times, thank you for standing with us. And here are just some of Israel's supporters from across the globe. Beautiful to see. That's it for our special briefing today. We're sending love to the Israeli and to the US Air Force and troops, and to our brothers and sisters and allies worldwide. And our prayers for every hostage to be back home with their families soon. May peace take hold. But in the meantime, as Dr. Ahmed said, we will take heart and remain strong. Thanks for watching, and thank you for standing with us. Israel Chai.